We're like this band, right? You may have heard of them.
Sound like
Strokes.
Andy Warhol's guy.
And you're watching the show.
Last night, she said, "Oh baby, gonna feel so down. Oh, and turn me off." When I feel left, oh fuck, I left the mic on. I fucking left the fucking mic on. Well, it's finally time to talk about a band that I've been waiting to talk about in my channel for a while. That's right, The Strokes. If you're aware of the indie rock scene of the 2000s, heck, if you're aware of the 2000s rock scene in general, chances are you definitely heard of them before. The Strokes are one of the most important and essential rock bands of the 2000s. They were influential, they were acclaimed, they were fresh and new since pretty much their debut album, and they're also a band that I will consider to be one of my favorite bands of probably of all time. Definitely not my favorite band, but I will definitely say top 10 at the very least. With 6 studio albums of different quality, 2 EPs and several singles, many which were popular indie rock staples, I figure, hey, this could be a good band to do a retrospective series on. Especially since the Strokes are a band that I've been listening to for almost 4 years at this point. Not a particularly very long time, but I'm certainly very familiar with them. And because no one has done a retrospective series of this band yet, well, unless you want to count Mike the Snare, which I don't. You know what? I'll be the first one to do it. This is the Strokes Retrospective. So let's go back to 1998, that's the year when the band was formed. The Strokes were formed in New York by 5 friends. Julian Casablancas, the lead singer and songwriter of the band, Albert Hammond Jr., the lead guitarist, keyboard player and backing vocalist, Nick Valenci, also a lead guitarist, keyboard player and backing vocalist, Nikolai Fresher, the bassist, and Fabrizio Moretti, who is the drummer of the band. The band rehearsed a lot during the late 90s in a building known as the Music Building in Midtown Manhattan, and they even got around to play their first live show in September of 1999. Over a year after, in January 2001, the band released their debut EP by the name of The Modern Age. And in a similar fashion as a lot of other rock bands, this EP became pretty much the blueprint to what will become their debut album later in the summer of the same year. Now, I've said that I was pretty familiar with the Strokes in the beginning of the video, but I actually haven't heard this EP until, well, recently. And I think one of the reasons as to why I think that's the case is because, well, I never really hear people actually talk about it. Heck, I actually hear people talk about Coldplay's debut EP more. But whatever, I decided to listen to it, and honestly, it's not really all that different from their debut for the most part. However, there's still some noticeable differences. The tempos are different, the vocals definitely feel more raw and less polished here.
Up on a hill, here's where we begin. This little story a long time ago.
And the lyrics are occasionally a bit different in places. The Modern Age and Last Night are mostly close to what their studio versions will eventually become in Is This It? And well, Barely Legal was a bit more different.
I didn't take no shortcuts. I spent the money that I saved up.
It's hard to talk about this EP quality-wise because, well, nearly everything I have to say about it I can just reserve for their first album. Besides, in reality, the EP was just made to catch the eye of a label. I mean, I don't have confirmation of this, but it sounds like it. And I mean, it very much did. This EP very much did spark a battle between several record labels out there. They were already so good, and they haven't even released any album or single. Crazy. I guess the only thing that I have to say about it other than the differences is that I'm really glad the studio version of Barely Legal is as different as it is, because otherwise it would have been the worst song on Is This It? Yes, I'm not really kidding, I don't really like the EP version. So after that... Hey, can you finally talk about Is This It? Jesus fucking Christ. Okay, let's finally talk about Is This It? I think I'm holding the anticipation for way too long. You don't say. So after signing up to RCA Records, the band released their official studio album debut in the summer of 2001. It was very huge. Yeah, that's right. Unlike many other bands or artists that didn't really get their footing until later on in their discography, the Strokes were an absolute sensation from the very start. It was but a big critical and commercial success, entering the UK charts at number 2 and even entering the US charts at number 33 respectively. The Strokes got a lot of people's attention. And you know what's funny about this album? Is that to this day it's still known to be their most essential and acclaimed album to date. Yeah, the band pretty much peaked very early in their career, so you must be thinking, oh, it all goes downhill from here, right? Yes.
Everybody sees me, but it's not that easy.
Not quite. Even if I and many other people think this is the band's best album, it's not the only good album that they've ever made. If it was, I would probably call this the rise and fall of the Strokes. Glad that wasn't the case. And the other funny part about this is that the lead single, aka the first single from the album, is probably my favorite song that the band has ever made. This song is just absolutely magical. This song was released a month before the album will eventually release in July, and yeah, it did fairly really well in the charts. Lyrics wise, this song is not really all that essential in a way. It's about the misunderstandings that happen in relationships and how sometimes it can be hard to explain what you're feeling. But the instrumentation, the sound, and just generally everything else, it's really what makes this song in particular so wonderful. One of the many things that people like about the Strokes is their fuzzy-like sound that kind of provokes a feeling of nostalgia and warmth. And even though this is pretty much true for nearly every song on their debut, I don't think it hits as hard to me as it does with this song. The opening riff, the distorted vocals, the emotionally evocative melodies, everything about this song is just magical, and the video is also amazing, one of my personal favorites. Of course, that's not the only amazing song on the record. The album has plenty of other amazing classic songs, as are some of the band's most memorable out there. You have the mellow opening title track, you have the Modern Age, you have Someday, which I think is a little overrated but still an undeniably great track, Barely Legal, which is probably my second favorite song here, and of course there's Last Night, which is probably the most popular song on the album and the song that I tend to associate the most with the Strokes. Yeah, that's right, already their most popular song. This band really did pick early. I mean, yeah, their most popular, their most accessible probably, and also the one that's probably the best to do karaoke on. Last night, she said... Okay, we don't have to play that again. Their debut not only has a lot of their best songs in general, but it's an album that comes together really well too. Front to back, not only this album is constantly entertaining, but it also keeps a lot of the record's qualities. The fuzzy nostalgic-like production, the endless sea of great melodies, the energy, the passionate vocals. Julian Casablancas is in general probably one of my favorite vocalists out there. He definitely stands out even among the bands that he managed to inspire for the rest of the decade. And another thing worth bringing up about the record is that Is the City is very much a retro album. It's kind of like a throwback to a lot of the 70s rock bands like Television or The Cars, but it also doesn't feel like an exact replicate. I feel like the Strokes do manage to create a unique sound out of those bands that influenced them. It was just an album that hit the right spot for a lot of people, including mine. It's a simple album, but its simplicity was very much part of its charm. It was so successful that thanks to the Strokes we got bands like Interpol, The Killers, Franz Ferdinand, Jet. Okay, maybe not always for the better. But yeah, a lot of the indie music that we got during the 2000s was all thanks to this one album. And rightfully so, it's an amazing album that I still think it holds up to this day. So now the question is, how are they going to follow it up? Well, the answer to that is quite simple, by doing the same thing again. Yeah, when it comes to following up your already quintessential album, the Strokes took the safest route and decided to do a very similar second album. They got the same producer, they got the same fuzzy nostalgic-like production, they got Julian Casablancas occasionally screaming in the mic. It's pretty much Is This It Part 2. Hell, it even has a great album cover, just like the first album. Yeah, the Strokes are generally a great band when it comes to album covers, and Room on Fire is probably my favorite album cover from them. And okay, one thing is making an album that's similar to their debut, but is the album good? Yeah, it's pretty good. Definitely not as good though. For the most part that is. Room on Fire still has a lot of things that I love from Is This It. As I previously mentioned, the album still has that very fuzzy production that I do really love from the band. Julian Casablanca still has a lot of great moments to shine as a vocalist, and even when it comes to the best songs from this album, I will actually say it's on par with Is This It. And by on par, I'm talking about Reptilia. So I've said that Hard to Explain is my favorite Strokes song of all time, but Reptilia is a close second if I'm being honest. It's only 3 minutes and 39 seconds, but holy fuck is it an absolute right. The songwriting of this song is insane. There's so many great moments throughout the track. Like, it has some of the best explosive moments in the band's discography, it has a very ferocious and fast energy and vocal delivery, it has an amazing accelerating riff, it has an amazing bass line, it has this part. Which is probably my favorite part of the song. Everything about it is just so satisfying. And even outside of Reptilia, I mean, there's the album's opener Whatever Happened, which has a very catchy melody and a very memorable vocal performance that does very much stand out. Automatic Stop, which is a song that I didn't really care for at first, but managed to grow on me. It's just a very nice song. And 1251, which might probably be my second favorite of the album. I don't know if this is a synth melody or a guitar melody that just happens to have a very different guitar tone to it, but I love it regardless. It's very sugary in the best way, I will say. And this song, also more than any other Strokes song out there, is probably the one that resembles the most as a throwback to the Cars. Both bands do have slightly different sounds, with the Strokes sounding more muffled and, like I said before, fuzzy. But you can still pretty much hear the influence just right away. So yeah, Room on Fire does indeed have some really great songs. I mean, the first 4 songs from the album alone, I could probably say it's on par with Is This It in terms of how good they are. But well, that's also kind of the problem, you know. The first 4 songs. What about the rest? Is it not nearly as good? Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't think the rest of the album is necessarily bad, in fact there are still some good, even great moments across the rest of the album, but they still kind of feel like album filler to me. Like, here's the difference between the weaker songs on Is This It and the weaker songs from this album. On the first album, the weaker tracks still feel like they had some needed presence. Like, they were good, they had things that stood out, and they very much felt inspired. Songs like Along Together or New York City Cops didn't feel like they were added to pad out the album to a longer runtime. Meanwhile, on Room on Fire, I feel like the band is just kind of going through the motions here. And it doesn't help either that this big weaker portion of the album is pretty much nearly every song after the first 4. With Is This It, you can pretty much listen to the whole album as a cohesive rock experience, with the best songs being scattered around on the track list. With Room on Fire on the other hand, I usually just tend to listen to the first 4 songs and then just stop there. This is a trap that not only the Strokes but also a lot of other bands and artists tend to fall into. You should never put the best songs from your album right at the very start, you're going to lose everyone's interest. I'm not saying the rest of the songs are terrible, I'm just saying that they don't really have much replay value at all. Especially since some of these songs also tend to suffer from generally worse production as well. I mean, Room on Fire still has for the most part good production, the guitars still have a great fuzzy-like tone to them, the parts that hit in some of the best songs do hit, but you also have songs like Meet Me in the Bathroom or The Way It Is, where the vocals or the guitars can feel like they're buried down in the mix. The Strokes have generally a kind of lo-fi sound in the first album, but the songs still feel like they were well produced, like there was definitely a balance, something that I occasionally think is missing in Room on Fire. I mean, it's definitely not too egregious, Gordon Raphael still knew how to bring the best of the band by that point, I just think it could have been done better. Room on Fire, despite not being nearly as acclaimed as the debut was, it was still a critical and commercial success. Peaking at number 4 on the Billboard 200, and it had generally positive reviews. Heck, people still like the album to this day, and I certainly like it despite its flaws. I mean, I can never deny those first 4 songs, quite amazing stuff. So yeah, so far I will say that the Strokes have been doing pretty great. Their debut was an absolute classic, amazing album that became very influential in the 2000s, and Room on Fire still had some amazing songs under its belt. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Oh. Right. Join me in the next episode.
The